Hi there, I'm Jen Cassetta, your Chief Badassery Officer. If you're feeling drained, hesitant, stuck in self-doubt, or you just have a case of the vlogs, the Art of Badassery podcast is here to help you unleash your mojo once and for all. We'll provide you with tips, techniques, and real-life examples of how you can kick ass in all areas of your life. You'll learn how to flex your mental muscles, rise above fears, and turn setbacks into superpowers. So let's enter the dojo and let's get to work. Hello and welcome to the Art of Badassery podcast. I'm Jen Cassetta, your Chief Badassery Officer, and today I have a very special guest for you. Before we get started, I do have three quick announcements for everybody out there. Three exciting events coming up that you can join and that I've repeated from the past. So you might have heard of them before. The first is Create Your Future, my annual digital vision board workshop. I don't even have a date yet, but by the time this comes out, there will be a date on the website that you can check out. It's a visualization exercise, and you will be building your digital vision board in a very powerful setting. So that's online, anyone can join. The second thing is the Burnout to Badass 8-week group coaching online program is happening again in January. So make sure that you reach out if you're interested. We're going to be building those 6 habits of high performance, which are mindset, mindfulness, meditation, movement, nutrition, and sleep. You've heard it before. And there's an earlier episode of this podcast all about the 6 habits. So if you are looking to start your year more powerfully, more peacefully, and really truly make well-being your priority this year, make sure you jump in. We meet once a week. And then last but not least, the third very exciting announcement is the Art of Badassery Retreat is going to Tuscany in 2025. L'arte di badassery, campo di badassery, 6 nights in a villa dated from 1570. It's incredibly beautiful, magical. We'll be doing the same type of programming as the first retreat in Montauk. That was such a success that I wanted to do it again, but in an even more beautiful setting. So we're doing mindset, we're doing meditation, we're doing martial arts movement, plus hiking, biking to the walled city of Lucca, which is nearby, eating home-cooked meals, sipping wine, and connecting deeply with other badass women. If that sounds exciting to you, make sure you reach out, because I already filled some of the spots, filled some of the rooms with past retreat attendees that I've already sprinkled the idea into. So make sure you reach out right away for all those details. They should be on the website by now. And without further ado, I am so excited. You know, I just feel so privileged and so blessed that these badass women, these black belts in badassery, are saying yes to my invitations to come on this show. Terri Cole, I've been following for over a decade. Through, I believe I first heard of her probably through Institute for Integrative Nutrition, where I went in 2005. And she's just been, you know, out in the world. And I'm going to read her bio real quick before we introduce her. Terri Cole is a licensed psychotherapist and global relationship and empowerment expert, and the author of, again, not one book, but 2 books, Boundary Boss, and her latest book called Too Much, that we're going to dive deep into today. For over 2 decades, Terri has worked with a diverse group of clients that includes everyone from stay-at-home moms to celebrities, can we find out who, and Fortune 500 CEOs. She has a gift for making complex psychological concepts accessible and actionable so that clients and students achieve sustainable change. She inspires, get this, over 1 million people weekly, goals, through her blog, social media, signature courses, and her popular podcast, The Terri Cole Show. Wow, Terri, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jen.
I'm so excited you're here. And, you know, I always like to just get to know you personally before we kind of dive into your work. But really, for how many years now have you been up to this? 27, is it?
Mm-hmm.
27 years. What got you started? Bring us back.
Well, I actually was a talent agent for supermodels and celebrities.
Wow.
negotiating contracts for like movies and like Pantene deals before I became a therapist. And I think my trajectory was a little bit not the regular trajectory
Mhm.
because I left a very successful career in entertainment, basically according to my father at the peak of my career. He did not understand why I was quitting my fancy, sparkly, very lucrative job to get, $100,000 in debt to NYU to get my master's to become, according to him, a social worker. So I basically, at that time, my own therapeutic journey had everything to do with why I became a therapist.
Mm.
So I stopped drinking when I was 21, got into therapy when I was
Wow.
19. So yeah, that's a whole thing. I mean, except for those long 2 weeks in '08, we don't have to get into that now, but okay. Sometimes you just got to test to make sure you really can't drink. Even the answer was, I really can't. Um, so I felt like it was like there was a parallel process going on with my own psychotherapeutic evolution and my career, right? Because I had all of this ambition, which, it's interesting how I sort of was able to decode that ambition because I really did think, hey, I'm just ambitious. It's just my nature. That's just how it is. And then, of course, a bunch of therapy later, I'm like, oh, I'm just trying to prove to my father that I wasn't born the wrong gender. I see what's happening. Like, I thought I was running towards something. And through
Uh-huh.
a bunch of deep diving, there was a little part of me that actually was able to recognize I was really running away from something.
Interesting.
And so when I was telling my father that, I was leaving this fancy business, I really started to value how I felt. And I was like, hey, I'm not happy.
Mm.
And he literally said, okay, sounds weird. I was like, good thing I don't need anything from you, seeing as I took out a million loans. But,
Right.
and I did ask for his support. And of course, eventually he gave it and then saw that I kind of think that if you have that gene, that work hard gene, you're just going to do it. And I don't love that yoga saying how you do everything is how you do anything is how you do everything.
I hate that saying.
Because
I
it isn't
totally disagree
true.
with it.
Me too. I don't think it's true, but I do think, at least for me, when it came to work, that I would always find my way to the top of wherever because I was really interested in a long game,
Mm.
as I still am now. So I've been doing this for 27 years, but I didn't start writing books until I was literally, you're talking about 4 years ago, I started writing
Wow.
books. So I've
Really?
been a real expert. I mean, I contributed to Chris Carr's books and Gabby's and a bunch of my friends, a
Mhm.
million people. And I think I contributed to 40 books before I
Wow.
had my own book.
Wow.
But there was something about, for me, I was really committed to really becoming an expert beyond a shadow of a doubt
Mm.
for myself. Like it wasn't clear to me what I would write about at
Hmm.
year 11 of my therapy practice.
Yeah.
I was still in the trenches with clients. I still am today too.
Mhm.
Just less and just more expensive, right? It just costs more money. You actually have to kind of be famous and have a lot of dough.
Yeah.
But for me then, I really felt like there'll be time for
Mm.
that. And I was saying for years, I'm writing a book. I mean, I think I've said I was writing a book for 10 years before I actually wrote a book. But I think that there's something really valuable about having your life, your ambition, your goals be a long game. Just
Uh-huh.
don't quit.
Yeah.
If you just don't quit, you'll probably get to the place you want to go. Right? It's not over until you go, I'm done trying. I
Yeah.
will never be done trying. It doesn't matter what it is. Like I will always
Mm.
continue trying,
Yeah.
you know?
So much to relate to here. The high functioning, as you say a lot in your book. But before we even get there, the book part, I totally agree. I went to a nonfiction book proposal writing class 17 years ago, and I never wrote the book, which was called Health and the City back then, which I
Hmm.
thought was so cool. And then never wrote
It
the
is
book
kind of
because I
cool, but
didn't think there was much substance to it. Also, I was kind of talked out of it by other people, which that part I regret. Um,
hmm.
but I hear you, having like a whole life and decades of experience and clients to pull from makes it a lot easier. But let's get back to that, you know, high functioning, hyperachieving, like
Hmm.
because to me, I want that. I want to feel
Sure.
that. So when you look back and you say, well, I was actually running away from something, is that always
Mhm.
bad?
It depends. Is what
Mm,
you're running away from causing you pain?
mm,
If the answer is no, it's fine, right? Like I don't think there's one size fits all. For
mm,
me, it was too much anxiety and
mm,
fear and lack driving my need to achieve. So
right.
if my need to achieve, my desire to achieve is because my whole game has changed. Right now, it's all about meaning. I want to, empower as many people in the world as I possibly can positively.
Yeah.
Right? Positive world domination is my goal now. Wayne
Positive
Dyer used,
world domination.
yes,
I love it.
that is. Wayne Dyer used to talk about how different phases of our lives we're being driven by different things. So in the morning of your life, he would call, this is the time for accumulation. We want the family, we want the partner, we want the home, we want the car, we want the stuff to a degree, right? We
Mhm.
do. This is part of the process. But as you get into the afternoon of your life, I turned 60 in March this past year.
Amazing.
I don't know if I'm in the fucking afternoon of my life, but his point is the afternoon of I'm definitely not in the evening yet, but
Right.
is that now it's all about meaning, right? We want to create meaning. And I never loved the whole thing about, when people talk about legacy, it always
Mhm.
just makes me so, ugh. I'm
Mm,
like, this is just your ego. What is and maybe it's the same thing, but for me, it's about what is the impact
mm,
I want to have on the world? What work am I willing to do
mhm.
to have that impact? Is it because I can't wait to be remembered and I'm so afraid that you're going to forget me once I'm dead? No.
Right.
It's that I hope that the waitress in Omaha who has 3 kids and got out of that abusive relationship but is broke and feels like she's effing screwed
Mm,
picks up Boundary Boss or Too Much and realizes that she's not. And
mm,
that one next right action at a time, she
mhm.
can absolutely change
Yeah.
her life to have it be better, less suffering, more joy. So my commitment is hardcore
Mm.
to women in particular. I like men too. I'm married to a man. I've got 3 sons. So it's
Yep.
not, I'm not anti-man, but
Yep.
who I know are women. My most of my practice and how this book came about is that in my therapy practice, I mean, listen, I'm sorry, but you attract who you are. Like you just do. So
Yep.
most of the women in my practice were very much like me,
Hmm.
highly ambitious, highly successful, super capable, and exhausted, right? Just burnt out. So many of them were coming to me because they were burnt out.
Right.
And I realized as I was talking to them, if I would say, oh, hey, what I'm noticing in this relationship, this is a codependent behavioral pattern, they would immediately reject the notion.
Mm.
And they would say, I'm not dependent on squat, Tara. You know that. I'm making all the dough. I'm making all the moves. I'm moving all the chess pieces on the board. I'm the puppet master of my life. Like I'm managing all the people, basically, and I'm doing all the things for all the people. And what
Hmm.
I realized was that they were being unduly influenced by the myths and also by the early definition. So Melody Beatty, Codependent No More, which is literally up until now has been the seminal text
Wow.
on codependency.
Hmm.
But the implication is that you can't be codependent unless you're enabling an alcoholic,
Mm.
unless you're, the long suffering wife boohoo sitting at home. Now, none of these women are that or would identify with that because they're fierce, because they're warriors, because they're building empires and getting shit done
Right.
in the world. So I knew I was onto something when I was like, I have to change this because I can't help them if they don't see themselves in the problem. And why did I know this so intimately? Oh, because their flavor of codependency was my flavor of codependency. So it was
Mm.
the same thing. I rejected the notion when my therapist first said to me many, many years ago. And I was like, what? So when I changed the name, when I expanded on codependency, pretty nervy of me, but I did,
Hmm.
all of my clients as soon as I added high functioning to codependency, were able to identify with that, raise their hands, saying, me, I'm the problem, it's me. I won't sing it for you, but that's what they were saying,
Yeah.
and feeling unashamed.
Yeah. Can we just go back just
Sure.
a bit? Codependency. So first of all, this is all laid out in your latest book, Too Much. Can you give us the
Yes.
subtitle real quick? Subtitle.
Sure. It's a guide to breaking the cycle of high functioning codependency.
Okay, so HFCs is your acronym for high
Yeah,
functioning codependency. Can you
yeah,
even just break that down just
sure.
for people like me? I haven't
Yeah.
been to a whole lot of therapy in my life. I've dove deep into the self-help world, personal growth. Wayne Dyer was my first love. And Tony Robbins, like back in that era, me and my dad
Yeah.
really bonded over that. But but like codependency, just as is, what break that down for us in a way that we can relate to it and maybe
Mhm.
see ourselves in it as well.
So this is you being overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the circumstances, the situations, the finances, the careers of the people in your life to the detriment of your own internal peace.
Beautifully said.
So thank you, because it's precise. And I make the distinction about your own internal peace because we're all lovers and friends and sisters and mothers and daughters and citizens. Obviously, we want our people, to get what they want, to be happy in life. So, of course, we're invested. But when you're an HFC, you're overly invested and you feel responsible for. So when we think about it at its core, any kind of codependency, regular garden variety or high functioning, the foundation of it is a covert or overt desire or attempt to control other people's outcomes.
Mm. And can you be that way, say, in your partnered relationship, but not with your parents or not with your friends? Because that's how I'm seeing like patterns even within myself, like, oh, I might be a little bit of that with this person, but not in the
Yeah,
rest of my life.
you can. You,
Mm.
you actually can. And then for some people, it's with everyone. And with some people, they're just not. But I
Right.
do think that I have some clients who certain relationships really kick up their codependency
Hmm.
in a different way than others. And a lot of times it's what I teach you in the book. It's about repeating relationship realities.
Mm.
So a lot of
More
times
about
we will
that.
be, yeah, we'll be doing something that's familiar,
Right.
right? We recognize something. So if, let's just say in your family of origin, the adults, if you had a traditional family system, um, not traditional anymore, but what used to be considered traditional.
Right.
Um, and let's just say if I'm thinking about my own family, I grew up, my father had all the power because he made all the money. My
Right.
mother had to drop out of college. She got pregnant with my oldest sister. And it was at a time when there was no other choice but to have that baby.
Hmm.
I don't know if she would have if there had been another choice. It was
Right.
1958 though. So I'm glad she did because I like my sister. But
Right.
um, what I saw was this imbalance in power, and that
Mhm.
my father would come home late from work and ask my mother to make him a sandwich or food, and she would make it and bring it to him sitting in his chair. Like,
Yep.
so for me, if I found myself in a way subjugating myself to another person in a romantic relationship, and if I was like, wow, how am I in a relationship like this again? I
Mhm.
came up with these three questions that you could ask yourself, and we could put them in the show notes too. But
Mhm.
and this is also in the book. But if you're wondering, I wonder if I'm repeating something from the past that's unresolved, because that's what we do. This is part of the process. Freud called it repetition compulsion, where it might sound counterintuitive, but we repeat dramatic or traumatic
Mhm.
experiences in our lives.
Mhm.
And I always see it as like the little kid in us, like seeking a do-over, right?
Mm.
Like this time I'm going to be good enough. And this, even though this partner reminds me of my dismissive father, I'm going to make them pay attention to me, or I'm going to be pretty enough or smart enough, or whatever it is that
Yep.
you're thinking about. So, how can we make this distinction? You can ask these three questions. Very simple. Who does this person remind me of?
Mm.
Second one is, where have I felt like this before? And the third one is, how is this behavioral dynamic? So let's say the example I gave, the behavioral dynamic would be me sort of walking on eggshells and catering to or pandering to the partner. So again, that's a form of management,
Mhm.
right? Because that's what I saw was this is how you manage the man in your life,
Right.
not how you relate to them with an open heart, but how you manage, right? They think they're in charge, but really you're in charge and
Mhm.
you're kind of managing them.
Mm.
Anyway, if I'd asked those questions in early relationships in my life, it would have been revealed
Yeah.
that I was repeating this pattern that I had seen with my parents. So, you guys, if you're watching or listening to this, those three questions, I call them the three cues for clarity. You
Mm.
can use them in sort of in any relationship, because here's the thing, it's not just romantic relationships where we repeat things.
Hmm.
It can be friendships, it can be work relationships. If you constantly find yourself with like an abusive boss and you had
Hmm.
an abusive parent, and you go, who does this remind me of? Because here's the thing, the reason why it matters, right? Because then people go, okay, well, maybe I discover that my abusive boss is, I'm repeating something with my abusive parent. Now, what do I do?
Right.
Why it matters is that when we have unresolved injuries in the basement of our mind, right, unconscious and in our physiological self, we have to talk them out or act them out. Like these are your two choices, right?
Right.
They don't just resolve themselves. They really don't, right?
Mm.
Time doesn't heal all wounds. Like we need to get this shit up and out. And
Yeah.
so
Up and out.
up and out,
Up and out.
up the bit. Yep. And picture me with a little, I've got a little miner's light on my head. I'm holding your hand down in the
Yep.
basement. Don't be scared. Because whatever you're going to find, it's already there, right? And all we want to do is make sure that the basement doesn't stink and that that smell isn't ruining the rest of our lives, because
All those dead
the
bodies down there.
yes, or just dead mice or whatever the hell it is. Who knows what's down there? But we got to figure out what it is. So
I love.
if you go, okay, so I am repeating this, that means now let's go back to the original injury.
Mm.
What happened between you and that parent? How did you feel about seeing your parents interact that way? What was your interaction with that parent? I give an example actually in Boundary Boss, I think is where I wrote it, but it was an experience I had in an internship that I had when I was in grad school. And I had this guy who was a very famous he was an addiction specialist, especially when Coke was really popular. This was the 90s. And
Hmm.
he wrote a book called When Willpower Isn't Enough, about cocaine addiction, whatever. Anyway,
Mm.
his name was Dr. Washington. And for whatever reason, I hated his guts. So,
Yeah.
and I felt like he was judgmental and scary and terrible and cold and awful. And I was complaining about him in therapy. And my therapist, that was like 3 weeks in a row, we're talking
Yeah.
about this guy who I've interacted with very little,
Yeah.
very little. And I don't see anything. Keep in mind, I'm in grad school, so I'm already in my early 30s. This isn't like, I had this all figured out in my 20s. I didn't. So she's like, could you describe him again? And I was like, well, he's tall. He's actually great looking. He has dimples, deep voice, kind of Brooks Brothers suit wearing, martini drinking,
Yeah.
weekend golfing, like that type of guy.
Yeah.
And she's like, Tara, who else would you describe exactly like that? And I was like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. I'm having a transference
Right.
to my boss as my father. And she
Mm.
said, and Tara, do you know why it matters? You turn into your 10-year-old self when you're interacting with him, because he would be in a meeting, I wouldn't even talk. If I saw him
Wow.
coming down the hallway, I would literally jump into the bathroom to avoid him. And she goes, do you understand why this is not good for you?
Mm.
How do you want a job at this place after you graduate? I go, yeah. She's like, right. Well, if you never talk in front of this guy, he's never going to know how smart you are, how
Right.
capable you are. Like you being your 10-year-old self with your potential boss is definitely not optimal. And I was like, oh my God. So I share that story because I feel like it really illustrates the concept so well, and that it can happen to anybody. Because I'd had tons of therapy at that point.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I mean, this is all, and I'm sure everyone listening right now is going back, excavating their past right now.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like, sh red flashing lights that so many of my relationships when I was younger, I always put this guy on the pedestal. And not only that did I put him on the pedestal, it was like I chose men that were already on the pedestal for some reason, whether they were the manager at the restaurants I worked at or the head, I know it's weird, but master in my martial arts school, right?
Yep.
Like the guru. These
Yep.
are the men that I was attracted to. Um, and and I look back, and of course, getting into relationships that were completely unhealthy with them and toxic,
Yep.
and probably because they might have the narcissistic behavior trait that you talk about in the book.
Yep.
Um, I look back and say, I was, I feel like I'm a smart person and was raised by really great people. And, how could I have let myself be so hoodwinked? How could I have let myself be treated so poorly in these
Mhm.
relationships? And your book is just shining this light that's so, so helpful. Also, I will shout out Dr. Joe Dispenza's work because I'm so deep in that right now that I had a
Mm,
recent experience that I haven't shared with everyone on the podcast yet because I'm still processing it of having these like nightmares in a row about being in high school and some of these men, got boys at the time.
mm,
And then actually running into one in the Delta Lounge in the airport randomly and having this
oh,
whole experience where, again, I can't explain it yet, but it was an opportunity almost for me to heal those parts of me. Because
yeah.
after that experience, I felt so complete, so whole, so like great.
Hmm.
And it was like, oh my God, I feel like I called that whole experience in. Anyway,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know where to go with this conversation. 'Cause I'm
I actually love what you're
floored.
saying though about the calling it in, and I do think that there is something to it. Listen, what we focus our attention on grows, and the universe, I believe, is endlessly like been conspiring in our favor
Yes, yes.
and is influenced by what we think, by what we say, by what we hold in our minds.
Yeah.
And so it is important not to be paranoid, but it's important to pay attention to what is your expectation? What
Mm,
is it that you want? What do you think you're worth? Right? Like what do you think your value is?
hmm
And I think that really understanding our past relationships and choices, because I always say like the cracked pot finds the perfectly cracked lid.
Hmm.
So if we look at Harville and Helen Hendricks's work
Okay.
on relationships, they created imago therapy. They wrote
Oh, I've done
best-selling
Imago.
books.
I've done
Yes,
Imago with a couples therapist with my husband, and it was really cool.
wonderful. I mean, they really cracked the code
Mm.
on effective communication in relationships. Just wonderful. And they've been married almost 50 years. Like they're wonderful. I had
Wow.
them on my show.
Wow.
But what they talk about is that, we have these early childhood wounds, and that in a way we're attracted. He's got a hopeful frame that we see it through, which is that we're attracted to people who together we can heal these wounds. It
Right.
doesn't have to be the same outcome. Now, maybe a less hopeful thing is that, from my own perspective, is that, but without intervention, without new tools, without new insights, how will we make a different result? So a lot of times we end up with the same unsatisfying result, which
Right.
is why I think that therapy and self-help is very important, because that can be the new tool
hmm
that shifts you to a new outcome.
I remember my couples therapist saying basically what you said, but in the opposite, in the negative, right? You'll attract the partner that will press your buttons, will press
Yep.
that wound, will scratch the wound,
Yep.
unless you do work together to
Yep.
communicate better, essentially. And that
Yes.
was that was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah. Very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
With high functioning codependency, with people listening, if they're like, what does that really mean? Like, we get
yeah,
it, we got the description, but let's talk, if we can, a little bit about the traits. Like,
yes.
what is the behavior in our everyday lives? What does it actually look like? Because I feel like theoretically it's one thing, but what does it look like? I mean, the number one thing is feeling responsible for fixing other people's problems,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
So,
That sounds so familiar. I mean, that feels like familiar in most women I know.
yep, same. Hence why I wrote this book.
Right.
Same. Because we do feel responsible
Yeah.
for that. And being mothers, if you're a mother, it's complicated
Right.
because we are tasked with being fully responsible for kids until we're not. And then you're like, oh, how do I do that? So that's actually very challenging, but possible, of course.
Say, can you
Um,
just repeat that one sentence again?
sure.
The first,
That with mothers and
yeah.
children, we are tasked, it's like our mandate to be fully responsible for them
hmm
in every way
Yeah.
until we're not.
Right.
And nobody tells us how to go from full on
hmm
to this is appropriate, let them make some decisions and then move into something else. And then now I should not be paying the rent when they're 30. Oh, should I not? Well, I can't let them get evicted. No, you can actually. And you
Right.
need to, because if not, they're never going to work out their money shit. Like, hello, stop.
Right. Right.
But I've seen this in my practice,
Yeah.
but feeling overly responsible for far too long and not going into the next phase, right? Because we have different seasons of life.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this later, your adult relationship, because all my kids are grown, I've got 7 grandbabies. It's like your
Wow.
relationship to your grown children
Yeah.
is different. And a lot of times with high functioning codependency and with parents who can't stop parenting, what we're really doing, even though this is so painful, but it's true, is that we are inserting ourselves. We're centering the other person's life and situations on ourselves.
Wow.
And that can just be in feeling like you have the answers, right? So another trait is auto advice giving.
Mm.
This is just
Yeah.
like anywhere. I was completely indiscriminate. I did not care. It could be a stewardess, it could be my hairdresser, anybody. Anyone
Yep.
had a problem, I'd be like, hello, I have the answer. I have
Have you
so much
tried
to share.
this? Have you
I
tried
have,
that? Yeah.
I have so many good ideas. I've got a great oncologist. I have read a book. I'm Googling it right now. Like,
Yep.
and if you're wondering, if you're
It's hard
listening or
not
watching,
to. It's hard not to want to give advice.
it is, but we need to unpack why and unpack the cost.
Mm.
Because here's the thing, if there wasn't a cost, there'd be nothing wrong with it.
Right. Right.
But there is.
Mm-hmm.
And the cost is to your relationship. Because when you are auto advice giving all the time, you are really trampling on the autonomy of the people in your life.
Yeah.
And it's much more loving
Mm-hmm.
to say, even to a kid, a 6-year-old, you can say, what do you think you should do?
Mm.
And then shut up and listen.
This is like coaching 101, and I think there's a lot of bad reps for coaching because people think it's about just giving advice, guiding the person. And true coaching is exactly what you just said.
Yep.
It's listening, sometimes repeating back,
Yep.
asking, having the person find their own answer.
Yes.
That's coaching, and it's hard to
It
do.
is. And it's not to say, listen, if your best friend is going through something, it's not to say we never give our opinion or say, hey, I went through something similar. This
Hmm.
helped me. Maybe it'll help you. It's not that we never do that. It's just that when you're in HFC,
Hmm.
the first thing you do,
Right.
that person's anxiety, their pain, their suffering is so intolerable to us that we
Mm.
can't even sit with it for a second. We just need to tie it up in a neat bow. I tell this story in the book. Hold on one second, I have to cough.
Yeah.
I tell this story in the book about where this concept sort of was born for me. When I was in my 20s, one of my sisters was in an abusive relationship. She was literally living in a shack in the woods with no running water, no electricity.
Oh
She was
my.
an active alcoholic, and this guy was abusive and doing crack. Okay.
Okay.
So you don't need to embellish that experience because
Right.
that's a 5 alarm fire for an HFC who is over functioning, hyper responsible, hyper independent. I mean, my life, even though I was so busy in my life at that time,
Yeah.
it's all I could think about was like, how am I getting her out of this horrible situation?
Right.
So I would talk to her, I would feel terrible. I would talk to my therapist, cry my eyes out. So I was
Mhm.
talking to my therapist, Bev, and I was like, I've done everything. I don't know what else to do. What am I going to do? And she
Mm.
just looked at me very compassionately and she said, Terri, let me ask you something. What makes you think you know what your sister needs to learn and how she needs to learn it in this life?
Wow. That's deep. It's like zooming out to see the soul's purpose and the soul's journey and saying, that's not mine to fix or even guide, really, sometimes.
Right. It's not my decision, but that was hard to hear,
Right.
right? Because I thought, well, it's obvious to anyone who's normal that her living without a fucking water tank is not how she needs to learn this lesson.
Right.
And my therapist said, I said, I think we can agree on that. She was
Hmm.
like, I don't think we can, Tara, because I'm not God
Mm.
and I don't know. But do you know what's going on for you? And I was like, no, obviously. So clue me in what's going on. And she was like, you've worked really hard to create a harmonious life.
Mm.
And your sister's dumpster fire is messing with your peace. And
Mm.
you really want your pain to end.
Wow.
I was like, holy shit, you are not wrong. That is
Right.
accurate. I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
I want it to be cleaned up because I know how to do it.
Yeah.
Well, I've got all the answers. Just why doesn't she just let me help her? In the end, what my therapist said, the thing that actually changed my mind and had me step back and draw a boundary with my sister is she said, Terri, I'm not saying you shouldn't save your sister.
Mm.
I'm saying you can't, that
Mm.
it's an impossible task and that it
Wow.
won't last if
Hmm.
you get her out of there because you do it. So in the end, I step back, I say, hey, but if you ever want to get out of this horrible situation, I'll always be your person. Less than 9 months later, she calls me. Okay, are you still my person? Of course I am. Getting in my car. Helped her. She went back to school. She got into recovery herself. And
Great.
instead of her youngest sister wearing the cape and
Mm.
being the hero of her story, she got to be the hero of her own story.
Beautiful.
And that's love.
That is love. Wow. That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. We There's so much to cover in this book, and I know that uh I released a podcast episode on boundary setting just probably a few weeks before this episode is going to go live. But because you are the boundary boss, right? Can we
I
just
am.
dig into it a little bit? Because all of this sounds like the codependency to me sounds like we're putting everybody else's wants, needs, and desires above our own. And when I
Mhm.
talk to audiences on this subject all around the country, sometimes all around the world, it's like people are raising their hand, like, that's me, that's me. One woman in my group, one of my groups stood up and said, oh, I call that approval whore. Just pouring out approval all the
Yep.
time because it means so much to me. So,
Mhm.
what are just some basic takeaways that we can think about, um, about around boundary settings to protect our peace?
Well, part of it is, it's interesting. The way that I wrote Boundary Boss, a lot of it was sort of from the perspective of this is how we get other people to respect our boundaries.
Mm,
And this is how we have better internal boundaries. That's what that book is really about. What's interesting about this book, that the more I dove into high functioning codependency, the more I realized that we, HFCs, we can kind of be the boundary bullies. We
mm,
can be the boundary tramplers inadvertently, right? So not intentionally. But again, go back to codependency is a
mhm.
desire for control because things feeling out of control makes us incredibly uncomfortable. Being in
Right.
the not knowing makes us incredibly uncomfortable, which is why we're usually good decision makers. This is
Hmm.
why we don't like surprises.
Yeah.
Like, don't throw me a surprise party ever, please. Thank you. And even being an HFC in recovery, a lot of the traits that I had when I was active, of course, a lot of them are great traits, right? This is the irony with being an HFC is that the more capable you are, the less codependency looks like codependency, but it's still codependency, which means you still have disordered boundaries, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically bringing it back to the boundaries. So I think that the first thing, there's two things that we can do that I think would be really helpful for anyone who's like, I don't know where I need boundaries. I don't know where I'm codependent. Help. Number one, do a resentment inventory.
Mm. Wow.
So
My
this
sister
is
would call
gonna,
that a big book of grievances. But
yes, big book of grievances. So what does this do for us? Well, we think about who am I kind of pissed off at right now?
mm,
Who am I feeling underappreciated by? This is a very common feeling for an HFC because we do so much for so many.
right.
And even when people are grateful, they really can't be grateful enough because we're giving from a disordered place.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I
So if
get
we're giving to feel okay about ourselves, if we're giving to control, if we're giving because we're afraid if we don't, what will happen, right? I always say with being an HFC, we have to learn what is my side of the street
it. Hmm.
and what is someone else's side of the street. We have to learn to let the chips fall where they may when they're not our mother effing chips,
Right.
right? Someone else has a right to to thrive, right? To succeed, to fail, to thrive, to flail.
Mm.
And when you are an HFC, we do not like anybody flailing. We do not
Hmm.
like it. We're like, there's a logical way to figure this out. Let's just take those steps. We get mad. And
Yep.
we get mad if people don't take our advice too.
Hmm.
We are right. We're spending all this time giving our grade A advice to people.
Yep.
And this leads us to feel exhausted, resentful, bitter.
Yep.
And I think that the better boundaries for ourselves,
Hmm.
when we really realize that we can put down other people's stuff,
Yeah.
that we're actually not on the hook. And how Bev, my therapist, let me off the hook where she was, She was so smart to tell me it's not that you shouldn't save your sister, it's that you can't, because she knows me. And
Mm,
if me doing what I was doing would eventually have saved my sister, I would have fucking kept doing it. Like,
yeah.
that's a fact. I would not have been able to stop myself. But when she was like, hey, it literally isn't going to work, then I was like, wait a minute, if it's not going to work, I need to stop doing it, you know?
You're just
So
spinning
I
your
think that,
wheels for no
yes,
reason. Yeah.
yes, because I'm quite efficient usually. And I was like,
Right.
well, that does not make sense. But I was relieved. And I think that all of you guys listening or watching have to give yourself permission to let's go back to the resentment inventory briefly,
Yep.
to handle those things. If you're resentful, and you'll see a pattern, you're going to see a pattern, because so much of the time, if you're an HFC, if you feel identified with this, we're really not talking about how we feel that much. We're always willing to take one for the team. We are like expert problem solvers. We're amazing in a crisis. Like, oh my God, we're like the best people in the world in a crisis, where we just know what to do.
Yeah.
We do not freak out. We're like, it's fine. This next thing, next right action, next right action. But we're not prioritizing how we feel, because what we prioritize is peace, quote unquote.
Mm,
Meaning we just don't want any conflict. We just don't want
right.
any problems.
Right.
We just want everyone to fucking get along. We just want peace in the bedroom and the valley and
Yeah.
everywhere. Is
Yeah.
where so funny. I was interviewing with someone and I said that and she said, no, I definitely don't want peace in the bedroom. I was like, all right, heat in the bedroom, peace everywhere else. She was like, exactly. And so what is that? What happens to us if we are self-sacrificing?
Yeah.
We're self-abandoning, right? Most of us, as I say in Boundary Boss, and I say in this book too, because it's so true, we're
Mm,
raised and praised to be
mm,
self-abandoning codependents.
mm-hmm.
So in this,
Self-abandoning. Whew. That's
yes,
deep.
codependence. And in this book, you're unlearning that process, but
Mm-hmm.
it's what we do naturally. It's like we problem solve
Yeah.
in the moment. If let's say it was back in the day and two people who were married both went to work somewhere. Remember when people left their house to go to work? We
Yeah.
don't do that anymore, but we used to. So let's just say you have two cars and your partner goes out first and there's a flat tire in the car they usually use. Immediately you'd be like, take the other car, I'll get an Uber. Like,
Right.
not even a thought. We wouldn't even let them walk. I wouldn't even let them walk back in the house. I'd be
Right.
like, okay, go. Right. Because I can handle that.
Right.
We're always willing to take one for the team, but it's more than that, right?
Mm.
It's not just that we're willing,
It's
it's
at
that we
your own
want to.
detriment.
It is,
Yeah.
it is. But why do we do it? Because we don't trust other people
Mm-hmm.
to step up. We don't trust that other people are going to do it the way that we want them to do it. A lot of times we suffer from
Yeah. As simple
perfectionism.
as cleaning the kitchen, right? How many of you out there will just do it yourself because even though you cooked the dinner, you're
Yeah.
also going to clean because someone else can't do it as good as you. And I'm only saying this because it used to be me until I
Yes.
said, you know what? If there's some crumbs, little grease, so what? I'm not
Yep.
doing it anymore. And
Nope.
that was it. And it makes such a difference in my peace.
Yes. And you're not walking around resentful,
No, exactly.
right? If you cook, the other person cleans. That's it. Like,
Done.
why
Easy.
do we got to do it all? There is so much. I mean, again, the emotional labor,
Yeah.
the invisible unpaid labor that all of us do to keep our lives going and keep the family life going, right? It's
Right.
not just our lives. If
Right.
you have children, if you have aging parents, if you have siblings, if you have a family of origin that you're still very involved with, there's all of this stuff. Like, I mean, obviously the toilet paper doesn't replace itself, as we know.
Right.
The
Right.
food needs to get ordered and all of those things, but that can create a lot of resentment
Yes.
in us. So if you're looking at the being overly self-sacrificing and what is the cost of that resentment, auto advice giving, as we said, right? We're so invested in people figuring out their problems. We've got great ideas. Auto accommodating, where now this is different than like your garden variety of
Yeah.
codependency, because if you are auto accommodating out in the world, it's like our antennas are so high as HFCs, we see everything. We're
Mm.
we're very into our environment. I tell a story in the book about that I was at my hair salon in Manhattan on a Saturday, which I normally don't go because it's so busy and I hate going there when it's so busy because I'm such
Yeah.
an empath and highly sensitive person. But anyway, I had no choice. And I have a 30-minute mask on my hair and I'm laying in a sink, just waiting with the mask. And all of a sudden I see that there's a line starting to, for the sink.
Mhm.
So every person that gets on that line with their little robe on, I'm
Mhm.
more and more stressed, more and more stressed. Like, I don't need to be laying in the sink. I could be sitting somewhere else. They could just pin my hair up and I'll go wherever. I don't care. So I've raised my hand to get an assistant to come over. And I'm like, hi, I could move. And she was like, Tara, hello, we do this every Saturday. We got it.
Yep.
You know, she was like, you're fine. And I realized, first of all, I did a whole right the next day I did a blog on that because I was like, this can't
Mhm.
just be me. I've been in
Right.
therapy for like 30 years and I'm still doing this shit. So
Yep.
this can't just be me. And that went viral.
Oh,
People were
wow.
like, oh my God, me too. So why do we care? Again, why do we care? Because what is the cost of that? I
Mhm.
could have been laying there resting my exhausted brain
Yeah.
or listening to a podcast or meditating, calling
Yeah.
my mother.
Yeah.
But instead, I'm fucking worrying about some shit that has nothing to do with me, that is not my responsibility.
Right.
And the bandwidth that we bleed with
Mhm.
these behaviors
Yeah.
and all of this overfunctioning and the overfunctioning and underfunctioning dynamic that we create in our relationships. I mean, I used to say that I could have a regularly functional boyfriend and I
Mhm.
could turn him into an underfunctioner in 2 weeks or less in my 20s.
Wow.
Right? Because I'd just be like, I
Yeah.
got it. I got it.
Yeah.
It's good. It's fine. We're good. I
I'll
made the
do everything.
reservation. I did the
Mhm.
thing. I got it. I got it. I got it. I mean, that is an HFC mantra is I got it, or it has to be me
Right.
because we don't. There really is a hyper um, independence
Right.
that comes with this affliction. But listen, you guys, we've already talked about the cost. We get the cost.
Yeah.
Burnout,
Burnout.
light.
That's
Burnout
it.
is
Burnout,
massive.
burnout, burnout.
Yep.
Sucking your life force energy away from you day
Correct.
by day. Yeah.
And what's so funny is that we're willingly bleeding it.
Yeah.
Right. It is sucking it, but nobody's making us do it.
Right.
Like, I hope that this interview, that you
Yeah.
guys listening, this is a wake up to realize that you can do it differently, that
Yeah.
you can do it better. It's not mean to the people in your life to have better boundaries and to have
Mhm.
set limits and to keep in mind the less bitter you are,
Mhm.
because all of this just creates martyrs.
Yep.
And
Bitter
there's no,
martyrs. Bitter
oh,
martyrs.
all martyrs are fucking bitter.
Yeah.
And there's no when that martyr mom, grandma, who's 75 now, when she was 20, she wasn't like, can't wait to become a martyr. Like
Right.
nobody, right? This is behavior that slowly but surely turns us into martyrs,
Right.
but it's avoidable. So how do we avoid it? We have to acknowledge that we're going to disappoint people.
Yeah.
It has to be okay. Cheryl Richardson has a book called Let Me Disappoint You.
Oh, nice.
Um, so I like it. And my feeling is it's either self-sacrifice, it's either self-abandon
Mhm.
or disappoint other people sometimes. And you know what? You're not that fragile. Neither are your relationships. It's okay.
It's okay.
Raising your awareness is step one. You're already doing it.
Mhm.
Getting the book, just go hfcbook.com. There's a million bonuses. I also have a toolkit for you guys, for
Oh,
your
excellent.
listeners, because I
Great.
feel like people get really overwhelmed, like, fuck,
Yeah.
where do I even start?
Yeah, I'm like
So
that right now.
okay, so you can go to terrycole.com/HFC, and there's a toolkit, there's meditations, there's a lesson, there's a PDF. Okay, what else can we do in our minds? And this is something that Mel Robbins talks about. So it's like a concept that she originated, where when someone is telling you some terrible idea that they have about some terrible thing they're going to do, and you can't wait to tell them not to, you're instead of that in your mind, you're going to go, let them.
Just
Just
let
let
them.
them.
Yep.
Just just let them. And
Yep.
your nervous system, I have a whole chapter in the book on nervous system regulation and emotional self-regulation. Because one thing that if you are an HFC, what you're not is an expert at your own feelings.
Yeah.
We're experts at other people's feelings.
Mm.
But our whole thing is we just keep going,
Yep.
right? It's like we have this ability to just fucking suck it up and just kind of keep going, being
Yeah.
like, okay, what else am I going to do? I'm going to lay down and die. I'm just going to keep going. But
Mhm.
our feelings matter.
Mhm.
And I walk you through how to become more intimate and nuanced,
Mhm.
knowing your own feeling. And then the last thing I want to say of something that you can do for your relationship, all of your relationships with
Mhm.
children, with adults, with anybody, is if you are the auto advice giver, if you're the one that, and even if people come to you and they want that from you, right? Even if they want it from you, I will invite you to ask expansive questions instead of providing answers with the honest knowledge that the truth is you don't know because you're not God
Mm,
and neither am I.
right.
And once you create all of this beautiful space for the people you love to tell you, share with you who they are, right? This is deepens the intimacy in our relationship so much because we stop treating people like projects,
And children, yes.
children in particular,
Yeah.
like your success is my success and your failure is my failure. No, you're
Mhm.
not the same person. It's funny. My mother always had this Irma Bombeck quote on her refrigerator that says, I promise not to take credit for your accomplishments if you promise not to blame me for your failures. I always thought that was a really good deal. Like,
Smart. Yeah.
okay, cool. I'll have my own and you'll have your own. And we all have the right to that.
Mm,
But if the only thing you did from listening to this episode of The Art of Badassery is you did a resentment inventory,
mm,
you downloaded my toolbox, my little free gift for you, and you started asking expansive questions instead of auto advice giving, can change your life.
amazing. This is such a different take on boundary setting than the previous episode because when I'm teaching, it's more about self-defense, protecting yourself against toxic
Yeah.
behavior. You're
Yeah.
really talking about um, your own, you have to set boundaries within yourself almost too.
Yes.
So this is such a beautiful take. I'm so excited that we get to share this with folks. I think it's going to help so many people. Everyone, you have those 3 invitations from Terri and from myself to go out into your life and try on
Hmm.
and report back. I want to hear, and Terry's going to want to hear how this changes your dynamics, how it changes your relationships, how it just fills you with more peace. That to me is the biggest takeaway in my life after doing some of this work. So
Hmm.
thank you. Really quickly, we're going to do our 4 rapid fire questions, and
Great.
then you'll just share where everyone can find you. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Number 1 is what was your favorite food as a kid?
Believe it or not, it was like butterscotch pudding.
Sounds
Weird.
delicious. Jello? That kind?
Yes.
Yeah, totally. Number 2 is if you could have a drink, doesn't have to be alcoholic, with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be? What would be the drink?
I would probably have a kombucha
Mhm.
with okra
Oh,
or
dream.
Barbara Streisand. Actually, I don't know. It's a toss up.
Well, we've had Oprah said before, so let's go with Babs.
Great.
Yeah, I love it.
Ah.
3 is what's your favorite self-help book? I know that's going to be tricky.
Oh, there's so many, but actually, I'll still stick with my tried and true because it was so long ago and it really put me on the path, which is Deepak Chopra's The Seven Spiritual Laws of Success.
Love it. I have 2 copies for some reason.
Same.
And then last but not least, your favorite hype song. What song is your go-to to get you going?
I think I still like Fight Song. This is my fight
Yeah,
song. I don't know.
so
It's
good.
still every time I hear it, I'm like, yeah,
Yes.
that's right on. I do have a lot of fight left in me,
Yeah.
always.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And that is why you're a black belt in badassery. Thank you so much, Terry, for coming on and share how everyone can connect with you.
Sure. I spend most of my time on Instagram, so I'm just at Terry Cole, TerriCole. I have a pod, as Jen said before, The Terry Cole Show. I have a beautiful community. If you want me to walk you through unpacking your own high functioning codependency, it's just terrycole.com/, membership. Yeah, so those are the places to find me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again. And everyone out there, thank you for listening. Thank you for hitting the subscribe button, leaving us a review, and letting us know again how this episode is working for you. That's all for today. Protect your peace, protect your power, and thank you for tuning in.